go ahead and get started? Mr. Carson will be back in here, I'm assuming, when he can. So I'll go ahead and get started with our CLT for you. If I can have a friend, I'm going to need another friend, read that CLT for me, please.
I can create and use clear learning targets that focus learning and promote student ownership of learning.
Absolutely. So we want you to be able to create and use, fill in the blank.
Clear learning targets.
Oh gosh, thank you. That was painful for a second. That focus learning and promote student ownership of the learning. Okay, so that's our CLT for today. You'll notice on your agenda there's a link there for your note catcher. It'll force you to make a copy of it. I do also have some paper copies for those of you who prefer to do the note catcher on paper. All right, anybody else prefer a paper copy? Okay, I'll leave these. Okay, all right. So you've got your note catcher there. We know our CLT for today. You want to go ahead and get started. All right. If you would turn around, get yourself comfortable watching the screen for just a minute. We would like for you to watch this video and think about the benefits of CLTs, and then we want to make sure you're prepared that you're going to be discussing a few of those benefits when we're done. Okay?
Alright, so we're going to get started. Deja, will you read our learning target for us today?
I can group ideas together within my body paragraph to best support my thesis.
Alright, so at this point we've done a lot of work.
When we go into the classroom, usually the first thing that we see for the day is our learning targets.
The learning targets aren't really just there. The teachers usually make sure that everyone understands what's going on before they dive into the learning.
And what I'd like to just know, what are some things that you're noticing right now?
A lot of times the teacher will take time in the beginning of the class to break down the learning targets so we know what we're trying to go for, and it gives kind of a purpose.
I'd love you to have a conversation with the folks in your group about what you remember, and you can actually pull those pieces out. What were some of the things that were included in a body paragraph?
This consists of like RDF or like a point or a statement.
There's a lot of peer sharing and talking with the people at your table. And so you can kind of bounce ideas off of the people that you're sitting with to see if they maybe have a better understanding of it than you do.
I think once you set them up in the intro paragraph, your body paragraph is really like giving you everything they need to understand.
I know personally what the teacher wants me to learn after she's explained the learning target at the beginning of class, but also I've asked any questions and clarifying questions as to what I need to know.
When you first get a learning target, a lot of people will kind of be unsure about what that really means, and that's where the self-assessment comes in, like the fist of five, the thumb. So, and actually I think it's really important for the teacher to see that too, to kind of assess for themselves, okay, so where do I really need to address with this group of students? Do they really get it?
So thumbs up, thumbs down. If you guys feel like that part is...
Are they not really getting it at all? Then the teacher can feel confident they've got this target, they really know what to do, they really know where they're going with it. And then, you know, when there's some students that are kind of this way, they can kind of assess, okay, this student's going to need some more help. And I think that really goes back to the whole topic of what Odyssey is really about, is making sure that all students succeed and that all students are doing well, and that it's no student is falling short while the rest are moving ahead.
Awesome. So you remember in the beginning of the class when I said when you were in organization as a bonus?
I know when I understand a learning target, when I feel like the confidence I can say that I can do whatever the learning target says, because a learning target isn't necessarily just like a purpose of what you're learning about, it's also a statement. So I think that once you do understand, I think it's the confidence that you can present it in through a project or whatever the teacher is asking you to do.
I can see myself doing a project or doing something that goes along with the learning target.
You can see yourself producing something or having a project that is going to capture that target.
Not just some students know what we're being asked to learn about, all students understand the concept. And I think that's a concept that is very great, because if students don't really understand the concept of what they're trying to learn, then there's no way they can really succeed if they don't know what their purpose is.
If you always know what you're doing and you're very rarely confused about things.
And then here's the evidence of how the
And I think that's like a lot of kudos to the teachers because they do take the time to explain everything at the beginning of class. And they also take the time to explain anything that you have questions about individually or with the whole class, so the whole class can get what you're trying to get.
Right. Does anybody else love it? The kids like kudos to the teachers. I'm sure he didn't say that just for the video.
No.
All right. So really quickly, let's just talk about what are some of the benefits to CLTs. What do you think?
It helps assess readiness of learning.
Helps assess readiness of learning.
Establishes intentionality.
Oh, establishes intentionality. What else?
Students can ask clarifying questions based on what they're supposed to learn.
Good. What else?
Increases student confidence.
Anything else?
There's that individual assessment, so the students know if they know what.
Kind of that's individual self-assessment, right? All right. Anything else you want to share? All right. So we know that there are benefits, right? There are benefits to this. This isn't just something that the district is making us do. There are real benefits to having clear learning targets. All right. One of the things I want us to talk. That's awesome. I want us to talk about is some of the ways we can share CLTs. Our last group was just throwing some ideas up here. Look at the ideas that they had. And let's talk about this for a minute. We all know that we write the CLT on the board, right? But beyond that, how do we share CLTs with students? What are some ideas? What are some ways you've seen? Some things you saw in the video? Look at some ideas here. What are some ways to share CLTs?
Well, I put mine, I have a slideshow for each unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put, throughout the slideshows, there's a bold colored slide that has the CLT, and they have access to those slides throughout the unit. And that kind of tells them too when it's like day 1, day 2, day 3, so.
Sorry, I'm not just not sure why that keeps happening. All right, as I'm pulling this back up, somebody tell me some other ideas you've had, or that you've seen, or that you use.
I mean, I just have mine posted on the board, kind of like that teacher did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, front board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For each class is at the top.
Yeah. And that's the basic expectation, right? Is that everybody should have these on their board every day, right?
I used to read mine aloud to the kids before I started listening.
So reading aloud, right? And I would say that's one of the things Ms. Coppinger, seeing now my bad typing, that's one of the things Ms. Coppinger has shared with me is that it's much better to have your students read your CLTs than you. So that's something, right? You'll notice I don't read the CLTs anymore. I have y'all read them. That's one of the strategies she shared. What else, Ms. McLean?
Well, one thing we did, and I think it came out of the science department, is we broke down our benchmark and did a data analysis. And so the kids have that data analysis in a plastic sheet. At the bottom of it, it says strengths, and they actually have, we call it the code, 6.RI.KID.1, whatever. And if that's today's, they pull that sheet out and, okay, where is it in the box? Is it in your strength box, or is it in your need to learn box? And so that brings a extra, attention. Oh, I really need to pay attention to this one because this is one I missed on the benchmark.
Yes.
So that's kind of what really Ben and I are doing, is making that.
So that too is very intentional about making sure the students understand what the standards are, what they say, and where they are in relation to that standard. Taking ownership. Awesome. Anything else you see up here or want to share about how to share them with students? I loved in the video the whole idea of I'm going to give my students a couple minutes at the beginning of class to discuss the CLT, right, among themselves. Do we all understand it? What is the teacher saying the teacher wants us to be able to do? Do we all understand it? And then if we don't, if we have questions, we have the opportunity to ask our teacher and clarify, right? So I feel like that's a pretty good investment of 2 minutes, making sure that they really understand those and have a chance to discuss them. All right? Questions about why CLTs are beneficial and about some different ideas of ways to share those? Any questions? All right, fantastic. For our next activity, we are going to be reading a short excerpt. It's called Knowing Your Learning Target. You do have access to it from your agenda, but if you'd prefer to read on a paper copy, I do have paper copies for you as well. What I'm going to ask is that you find your sits, your surprises, new information, and what made you think. So your purpose in reading the article is to find something that's surprising you or making you think or giving you new information. Want a paper copy? Anybody else? Okay. So if you would take 2 minutes to read this article, knowing that we will share our sits with our partners and with the group. All right, we know this is a lengthy article and that not everybody has been able to get through it in its entirety. But we are hoping that you have found a few of your surprises, new infos, and thoughts. So if you would, I'd like to ask you to take a minute with a partner, with a person near you, and talk about what surprised you, what was new info, what made you think. You could take 1 minute and discuss that with somebody near you. All right, I want to go ahead and share some of these with the group so that we can all kind of benefit from your great ideas. So let's see, if you would, Miss Harvey, tell me something that somebody around you discussed.
We talked about how students have the information they need to keep track of their own mastery, and they know what it's going to take to get them to mastery.
More ownership. Or opportunity for ownership.
Mr. Goza, tell me something you overheard.
What I really liked is that Ms. Button was talking about some of her students and how that it made sure that the kids were able to get on the boat because it's posted in the room. And if you take it even away from that and just say that even a kid coming in tardy isn't going to be as lost because they can still gather some information independently without having to have the whole class, rephrase through things.
Yeah, nice, great point. All right, somebody over here, tell me something you overheard. Or that sounded.
When we were talking, Angela brought up student-friendly language, and we've kind of been given a pretty clear direction on what we are supposed to do with these. And so we thought maybe having that discussion piece that somebody mentioned earlier, where they sit and talk about what it means and do they understand. So
Right, because the standards, it has to be standards-based, right? Standards aren't always necessarily real student-friendly language, right? So finding a way to kind of bridge that gap. Good. Somebody over here, what else is something that you overheard, surprising or interesting or made you think?
Well, I can just say that something that made me think was, after the beginning of class and we kind of go over what target is and stuff, how often do I continuously refer to it, I would say that's probably not as a consistent thing that I do. So that made me think maybe I can do better like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something Mr. Carson is really good about in here during our sessions, is reminding us in the middle of it and reminding us before we do our CLT, or before we do our exit ticket, what our CLT was, for sure. All right, anybody else have anything you want to share? All right, fantastic. All right, so speaking of which, Mr. Carson, I think they're in an admin meeting, but wanted to make sure we stop in the middle. We're about midway through. Stop in the middle and revisit our CLT. Let me have a friend read it aloud for us again.
I can create and use clear learning targets that focus learning and promote student ownership of learning.
Okay, so the first half we've really talked about the why, really, and kind of how, right? And this next little bit, we really want to focus a little bit more on the what, right? The specific whats of our CLTs. All right?
All right, so you'll have a link to this rubric. But we
Anybody
also have hard copies.
prefer a paper copy of the rubric you're going to be looking at? It's all good. That's why we have them. That's why we have them. Anybody else prefer a paper copy to look at?
No, I do.
Wood. Good. Thank you. Anybody else?
All right, so I'm going to give you 1 minute just to quietly look over this rubric. Okay, thank you. Now, with a partner, somebody sitting close to you, what I want you to do is take a look at one of these CLTs that you all gathered at the end of last week. Choose one
And then with a partner, I want you to look at the rubric and decide where the CLT would fall on this rubric. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for that. All right, we got some great discussion going on here. So we don't have time today to get into the next step, which might be, how do we improve, how do we rewrite, how do we add into these CLTs to make them a little stronger. But you do have the rubric now that you can use to help you as you plan. I do want to point out, however, that you have a link to your IB command terms. If you just glance down the list of the command terms, which are basically just strong verbs, and then you look at the accomplished column in the rubric, you're going to see a lot of your command terms in that accomplished column. So that's just the connection between IB and what the county is asking you to do. So, thank you.
Awesome. All right. Any questions about that before we move on? One of the things that I found really interesting in reading through some of this, especially that article and looking through some other stuff, is the whole idea of success criteria. Do you remember reading about that in the Knowing Your Learning Target piece, maybe if you got that far? The whole idea that we spend a lot of time building these great CLTs and improving them, but then sometimes we miss the step of elaborating then both to ourselves as the teacher and to our students about what success, about what proficient in that CLT would look like. Now we have to be really careful, right, with our CLTs in the district. The way our district likes us to write them is not activity-based. It should not be a specific activity in the CLT. However, right, it should be the big idea that they're walking away with, right? But maybe with some implication of how they will be assessed. But I think the next step that's super important in reading all this stuff is kind of fleshing out, what does it look like to be proficient in that CLT? Do I understand what it's going to look like? Do my students understand at the end of the day what it's going to look like to be proficient in your CLT, right? So that would be one thing I would add is make sure we're kind of thinking through that. And not only do they understand it, but then do they understand what success is going to look like at the end of the period? All right? So just something to kind of think about. I won't spend any time on this just because hopefully you know this is there by now. At the bottom of our page are some resources. Again, trying every time to take some feedback. Remember at first I just made a folder and then people were like, I got too many clicks. And so I just put them all on the page. But then people were like, Allison, that's just a list of links. So now I'm giving you the title of what it's taking you to. So that again, try to give you a little bit more information. But there are a lot more great resources to learn about learning targets. I think Tara was one of the department heads who to your group said, like, y'all, we're all still figuring out the CLTs and exactly what they look like, and right? So I would argue nobody's an expert in this in our district because, again, we're still kind of fine-tuning what they want those to look like. So, again, knowing more, always a great thing. I want to make sure I point out, too, that you see, if you go back to our previous agendas, you'll find that I've added a place down here. Mr. Dobler is so sweet to record these for us, and then we are able to post them back, so you can always go back and look through stuff. So I want to make sure you know that's where it's going to be on your resource page, it's down at the bottom. Alrighty, let's go ahead and finish up today with our exit ticket. Everybody needs an index card. Oh, perfect. Perfect. So, if you would, thinking about today's CLT, going to create and use clear learning targets that promote student ownership and focused learning, right? We're going to think back about today's CLT and we want to reflect and respond to the following prompt. I used to think about CLTs, now I think, and based on this today I will commit to. So you're going to have 3 sentences on your index card that's going to be your exit ticket. Again, I used to think, now I think, and based on this today I will commit to. And if you would, just make sure you've got those 3 lines. Write your name on the card. You can leave it in the middle of the table. And have a great rest of your Monday. We appreciate your time today.